The smell of old parchment and cold marble often lingers in the quiet corners of history, a silent witness to the moments when the world begins to shift on its axis. Imagine, if you will, the scratching of a stylus against a wax tablet in a small, unassuming villa in Apollonia, a sound so rhythmic and steady that it might lull a weary traveller to sleep. It is the year 44 before the Common Era, and the air across the Adriatic is thick with a tension that no one can quite name, yet everyone can feel. In this coastal retreat, a young man of 18 years, named Gaius Octavius, sits among his books and his tutors, unaware that the world he knows has already crumbled into dust. He is a boy of slight build and delicate health, often prone to illness, possessing a quiet intensity that masks a mind as sharp as a gladiator's blade. The news arrives like a sudden chill in a warm room. A messenger, breathless and dusty from the long road, brings word from Rome that the great dictator, Julius Caesar, has been murdered on the Ides of March. The Senate floor has been stained with the blood of the man who claimed to be the father of his country, and the city is spiraling into a fever of panic and uncertainty. But for young Octavius, the news carries a weight that is far more personal and far more terrifying. In his will, Caesar has done the unthinkable. He has adopted his great-nephew as his son and named him his primary heir. In an instant, the studious teenager is no longer just a private citizen. He is Caesar. He inherits not just a vast fortune, but a name that carries the weight of a god and the target of every assassin in the capital. His friends and his mother plead with him to stay in hiding, to renounce the inheritance and slip away into a life of safe, comfortable obscurity. The risks are too great, they say, and the men who killed the uncle will surely come for the son. But history is often forged by those who refuse the path of least resistance. Octavius looks out toward the horizon, toward the sea that leads back to the heart of the Republic, and decides to claim his destiny. He understands even then that the old world is dying, and that someone must be the architect of whatever comes next. As you settle into your blankets and let the weight of the day drift away, perhaps you can feel the same sense of quiet stillness that precedes a great journey. Here at the Slumber Archives, we believe that the stories of the past provide the perfect tapestry for a restful night. We share new history narrations just like this one every single day, weaving the threads of time into a gentle path toward sleep. If you find comfort in these tales, you might consider subscribing so that we can join you every evening, and perhaps leave a like to help other weary souls find their way to our archives. Now, let us return to the dusty roads of Italy, where a young heir is beginning his long walk toward power. As Octavius travels toward Rome, he does not move with the thunder of an army, but with the careful precision of a diplomat. He begins to call himself Caesar, a name that acts as a beacon to the veteran soldiers who once followed his great-uncle. They see in this pale, soft-spoken youth a shadow of the man they loved, and slowly a following begins to grow. But Rome is not a vacuum waiting to be filled. It is a den of lions, and the most formidable of them all is Marc Antony. Antony is everything Octavius is not. A hulking, charismatic general, a man of appetites and grand gestures, a soldier who has bled for the Republic and expects to inherit its command. When the two men finally meet, the air is thick with a mutual disdain that they both work hard to conceal. Antony looks at the boy and sees a young pup who can be easily brushed aside, while Octavius looks at the general and sees a relic of a chaotic past. The rivalry is immediate, yet the necessity of the moment forces them into a fragile, uneasy alliance. Rome is a city of traditions, of ancient laws and the sacred authority of the Senate, but those traditions are fraying at the edges. The people are tired of the bread lines, tired of the street brawls, and tired of the endless cycle of civil war that has drained the lifeblood of the city for generations. There is a profound exhaustion that settles over a civilization when it has been at war with itself for too long. The Roman Republic was built on the idea of shared power, of checks and balances, and the fierce independence of its citizens. But as the years passed, that independence turned into factionalism, and the checks and balances turned into gridlock. Octavius walks through the forum and sees the scars of the turmoil, the charred remains of the Senate house, the fearful glances of the merchants, the way the shadows seem to stretch longer over the cobblestones. He begins to realize that the old ways, as beautiful and noble as they were, might no longer be enough to keep the peace. He finds himself caught between two worlds, the heavy weight of Roman tradition, which he deeply respects, and the desperate, visceral need for stability. To save Rome, he might have to change it forever. He begins to cultivate an image of piety and restraint, contrasting himself with the wilder impulses of Marc Antony. While Antony carouses and seeks glory on the battlefield, Octavius spends his nights studying the law, building alliances in the shadows, and learning the intricate dance of Roman politics. He understands that power is not just about the sword, it is about the stories people tell themselves about who they are and who protects them. And so, the stage is set for a drama that will span decades. The initial alliance between Octavius, Antony, and the wealthy Lepidus, known to history as the Second Triumvirate, is a marriage of convenience born of blood and necessity. They agree to divide the Roman world between them, a temporary truce that everyone knows cannot last. As they hunt down the assassins of Caesar, the young heir watches and learns. He learns when to be merciful and when to be cold. He learns that the people will forgive almost anything if they are fed and if the streets are safe. The twilight of the Republic is a long, lingering evening, where the sun sets on the old gods of the Senate, and the dawn of something entirely new begins to flicker on the horizon. Octavius, the boy who was never meant to survive the year, stands at the center of this shifting light. He is no longer just Gaius Octavius. He is becoming the architect of peace, though the price of that peace will be higher than anyone can yet imagine. As we drift further into the history of this remarkable man, let the rhythm of the past carry you toward a deep and restorative rest, knowing that the chaos of the world eventually gives way to the quiet order of the night. The air in the Roman Forum often carried the scent of dry parchment and the faint metallic tang of bronze coins, a sensory reminder of the bureaucracy that held the Mediterranean together. But in the wake of Caesar's death, that air grew heavy with the smell of wood smoke and the nervous energy of a city holding its breath. Octavian, barely 19 years old, found himself navigating a landscape where every shadow seemed to whisper of betrayal. He was a young man of slight build and often frail health, yet he possessed a mind that functioned like a master clock, precisely calculating the movement of every gear and lever of power. The path to stability began not with a grand speech, but with a cold necessity. In the autumn of the year 43 before the Common Era, on a small island in a river near Bononia, 3 men met to carve the world into pieces. Octavian sat across from Marc Antony, Caesar's experienced and charismatic general, and Lepidus, a man of high standing and steady hand. They formed what history remembers as the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the informal alliance of Caesar's time, this was a legal entity, a 3-headed dictatorship designed to restore order to the Republic. But for Octavian, it was a shield, a way to gather the resources he needed while sharing the burden of a bloody transition. Together, they looked toward the east, where the men who had struck down Julius Caesar, the self-proclaimed liberators, Brutus and Cassius, had gathered a massive army. The resolution came on the plains of Philippi, in the cool, misty mornings of northern Greece. It was a landscape of marshland and rugged hills, where the clash of iron against iron echoed through the valleys for weeks. Octavian was unwell during much of the campaign, his body often failing where his will did not, yet he remained a constant presence, a symbol of the Julian legacy. When the dust finally settled, and the sun dipped below the horizon on the final day of battle, the assassins of Caesar were gone. Brutus and Cassius had taken their own lives, and with them the last flickering hope of the old senatorial cause had vanished into the twilight. The world was now truly in the hands of the three, and as the soldiers cleaned their blades by the light of low-burning campfires, the long, slow process of building a new Rome began in earnest. With the threat of the assassins removed, Octavian returned to Italy, but he did not return as a conquering warlord in the traditional sense. He understood, perhaps more deeply than any man of his age, the power of perception. While Antony travelled to the wealthy, sun-drenched provinces of the East to bask in the luxury of the Hellenistic courts, Octavian remained in the heart of the empire, dealing with the gritty, difficult realities of governance. He began to craft a public image that was intentionally modest, almost quiet. He shed the flashy attire of a revolutionary and began to dress in the simple, traditional wool togas of the Roman elite. He spoke of the mos maiorum, the ways of the ancestors, repositioning himself not as a destroyer of the old ways, but as their most humble and dedicated restorer. This was a masterstroke of psychological theatre. By appearing to look backward to a golden age of tradition, he was actually clearing the path for an entirely new future. However, the reality of maintaining peace was far less poetic than the image he projected. One of the most daunting tasks he faced was the settlement of veterans. Tens of thousands of professional soldiers, men who had spent their youth in the mud and blood of Gaul and Greece, were now owed their promised rewards. They wanted land, fertile Italian soil where they could plant olives and vines and live out their remaining years in quietude. To provide this, Octavian had to navigate the treacherous waters of land confiscation, taking territory from established towns to give to his loyal legions. It was a period of immense tension, where the cries of displaced farmers clashed with the demands of an armed and restless soldiery. Octavian managed these logistics with a cold, administrative brilliance, balancing the scales just enough to prevent a total collapse of the social order. He walked a razor's edge, knowing that a single misstep could ignite another civil war before the embers of the last had even cooled. As the years of the 30s before the Common Era unfolded, Octavian's influence grew like the slow, steady rise of a tide. While the city of Rome slept, he worked late into the night by the light of a single oil lamp, poring over maps and grain supply reports. He recognized that the people did not just want glory, they wanted bread, and they wanted the safety to sleep through the night without the fear of proscription or plunder. He began to repair the broken aqueducts, ensuring that clear, cold water flowed once more into the public fountains. He organized the cleaning of the sewers and the restoration of crumbling temples, turning the city into a living monument to his own competence. Each stone laid and each pipe repaired was a silent argument for his leadership, a testament to the idea that under his watch, the chaos of the past was being replaced by a predictable rhythmic harmony. Meanwhile, the relationship between the members of the triumvirate began to fray, like a rope pulled too tight from opposite ends. Lepidus was gradually sidelined, his influence fading until he was eventually forced into a comfortable but powerless retirement as the chief priest. This left the world divided between two titans, Octavian in the west and Antony in the east. It was a study in contrasts that Octavian used to his full advantage. He portrayed himself as the quintessential Roman, dedicated to the stern virtues of the Italian soil, while he painted Antony as a man lost to the decadence and foreign mysteries of Egypt. It was a slow, deliberate campaign of character, fought not with swords, but with whispers, coins, and the careful shaping of public opinion. The logistics of power are often found in the smallest details, and Octavian mastered them all. He understood that to rule a world, one must first ensure that the city at its center is at rest. He cultivated a circle of brilliant advisers, men like the wealthy and cultured Maecenas, who helped shape the artistic and literary soul of the new era, and Agrippa, a loyal and tireless general who possessed the tactical genius that Octavian sometimes lacked. Together, they formed a collective mind that was capable of overseeing everything, from the price of wheat in the markets to the grandest architectural projects in the Campus Martius. As we imagine the streets of Rome during this time, we can almost hear the rhythmic tapping of the stonemasons' hammers and the low murmur of the crowds gathering in the newly cleaned forums. The air is no longer thick with the scent of fear, but with the smell of fresh lime and sawdust. Octavian is no longer the boy who stood in the shadow of Caesar's ghost. He is a man who has learned to command the light itself. He moves through the city with a measured pace, his eyes always scanning the horizon, always thinking 3 steps ahead of his rivals. He is the architect, and the foundations he is laying are designed to last for centuries, long after the names of his enemies have been carved into the dust of history. The transition from a world of constant strife to one of structured peace is a slow and delicate process, much like the way the mind moves from the busyness of the day into the stillness of the night. Octavian understood that people would trade a great deal of liberty for the simple luxury of security. He gave them a world where the laws were predictable, where the roads were safe for travel, and where the future felt like a place one could actually inhabit. And so, as the moon rises over the 7 hills of Rome, casting long, cool shadows over the marble and the brick, we see a city that is finally beginning to breathe again. The rise of Octavian was not just a rise to power, but a rise toward a new kind of order, one that would cradle the Mediterranean in a long, golden afternoon of stability. The boy who was never meant to survive has become the man the world cannot live without. And as he settles into the gravity of his role, the empire settles with him, drifting toward a quiet and enduring strength. The smell of old parchment and beeswax candles fills the private chambers of the Roman Senate, where a heavy, wax-sealed document sits upon a table, waiting to change the course of history. It is the will of Marc Antony, or at least the version of it that Octavian has seized from the temple of the Vesta. As the wax is broken and the words are read aloud to the gathered elite, a cold realization settles over the city like a winter mist. This is no longer a simple disagreement between 2 generals, but a fundamental schism between 2 worlds. One world is the Roman West, rooted in the stern traditions of the Tiber, the mossy stones of the Forum, and the stoic dignity of the citizen soldier. The other is the Egyptian East, a land of ancient gold, shimmering silks, and the intoxicating lotus-scented air of Alexandria. Octavian, ever the master of the narrative, does not cast his rival as a Roman enemy, for the people are tired of shedding Roman blood. Instead, he paints a picture of a man who has forgotten his home, a man who has been bewitched by a foreign queen, and the strange, glittering gods of the Nile. The propaganda begins to flow through the streets of Rome like a slow-moving river, carrying stories of Antony's supposed decadence and his desire to move the capital of the empire away from the 7 hills to the delta of Egypt. In the minds of the Roman people, Cleopatra becomes a figure of mythic proportions, a sorceress of the East who has ensnared a Roman hero, turning him into something unrecognizable. This shift in perception is vital, for it transforms a looming civil war into a crusade for the soul of Rome itself. It allows the weary citizens to feel a sense of unity once more, a shared purpose in defending their hearths and their heritage against an alien influence that feels as vast and unpredictable as the sea. As the seasons turn and the preparations for war begin in earnest, the atmosphere in the Mediterranean shifts from the frantic energy of conflict to a heavy, waiting stillness. Ships are built in the sun-drenched docks of Italy, their wooden hulls smelling of fresh pine and pungent pitch. Tens of thousands of men march toward the coast, their sandals crunching rhythmically on the gravel of the Appian Way. a sound that becomes the heartbeat of the peninsula. Meanwhile, in the east, the fleet of Antony and Cleopatra gathers in the turquoise waters of the Ionian Sea, a floating city of purple sails and gilded prows. The contrast is stark. On one side, the disciplined, utilitarian strength of Octavian's forces, led by the brilliant and tireless Agrippa. On the other, the opulence and staggering scale of the combined forces of the East. The year is 31 before the Common Era, and the world seems to hold its breath as these two armadas converge near the promontory of Actium, off the coast of Greece. The air is thick with the salt of the sea and the heat of the late summer sun, casting long shimmering reflections across the waves. On the morning of the 2nd of September, the wind begins to pick up, snapping the banners of the legions and stirring the whitecaps of the sea. Octavian stands upon the deck of his flagship, a quiet figure amidst the chaos of preparation, watching as the massive, towering quinqueremes of Antony's fleet begin to move. These ships are like floating fortresses, built high and heavy to crush anything in their path, but they are sluggish in the water, burdened by their own magnificence. Agrippa, sensing the advantage, directs his smaller, more agile Liburnian galleys to swarm around the giants like hawks circling a lumbering beast. The battle is not a sudden explosion of violence, but a slow, grinding dance of wood and iron. The sound of oars striking the water in unison creates a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrates through the very timber of the ships. There is the sharp crack of breaking wood as prows collide, and the whistling of arrows arching through the bright blue sky. But as the afternoon wears on, a strange and unexpected thing happens. Cleopatra, watching the struggle from the rear with her 60 Egyptian ships, suddenly commands her fleet to hoist their sails and flee toward the south. Seeing his queen depart, Antony abandons his men, leaping into a fast galley to follow her, leaving his massive army and his loyal sailors to their fate. The victory at Actium is not just a military triumph. It is a psychological turning point that ripples through the Mediterranean like a stone dropped into a mirror-still pond. The news travels slowly at first, carried by messengers on horseback and sailors returning to port. But as the reality sinks in, a profound sense of relief begins to wash over the Roman world. The long, dark night of the civil wars, which had lasted for nearly a century, is finally beginning to break. The fractured pieces of the Republic, which had been pulled apart by the ambitions of powerful men, start to drift back together under the steady hand of the young victor. Octavian does not return to Rome as a conqueror of his own people, but as a restorer of peace, a man who has chased away the shadows of the east and brought the light back to the west. As he travels through the provinces in the wake of the battle, Octavian moves with a new kind of measured grace. He is no longer the vengeful youth seeking to avenge his father's death, but a statesman who understands that the empire needs healing more than it needs punishment. He grants clemency to those who fought against him, absorbing the remnants of Antony's legions into his own, and begins the long process of stabilizing the borders. The soldiers, who for generations had known only the cycle of rebellion and retribution, find themselves building roads and bridges instead of digging trenches. The swords are not literally beaten into plowshares, but the energy of the military is redirected toward the infrastructure of a lasting peace. In the quiet moments of the evening, as the campfires burn low and the stars emerge over the Mediterranean, a new sense of identity begins to take root. People no longer speak of themselves as belonging to this faction or that general, but as Romans, members of a singular unified body that stretches from the Pillars of Hercules to the banks of the Euphrates. This shift is subtle, like the changing of the tide, but its effects are permanent. The fear of another brother-to-brother conflict begins to fade, replaced by a cautious, growing hope. The city of Rome itself seems to expand, its walls no longer feeling like a fortress, but like the heart of a living organism that is finally healthy. Meanwhile, in the distant palace of Alexandria, the final act of the old world is playing out in the heavy, perfumed silence of the royal chambers. Antony and Cleopatra, once the most powerful couple in the world, find themselves isolated as their allies melt away like snow in the sun. There is a tragic, weary beauty to their end, a final embrace in a city that had always felt more like a dream than a reality. When the news of their deaths reaches Octavian, he does not celebrate with loud fanfares or public spectacles of cruelty. Instead, he moves with a quiet, somber efficiency to bring Egypt into the fold of the empire. The land of the pharaohs, with its vast wealth and its ancient mysteries, becomes the personal province of the Roman leader, ensuring that the grain of the Nile will forever feed the people of Rome. The transition from the chaos of the Republic to the order of the Principate is now almost complete, though the world does not yet have a name for what it is becoming. It is a time of profound stillness, the kind of quiet that follows a great storm when the air is clear and the sea is flat and silver. Octavian, now the undisputed master of the world, stands at the threshold of a new era. He has survived the fires of youth and the storms of war, and as he looks out over the vast expanse of his domain, he sees not a collection of conquered territories, but a garden that requires the steady, patient hand of a caretaker. The boy who was once called Octavius has become the architect of a peace that will endure for centuries, a peace built on the ruins of the old world, but reaching toward a future that no one could have imagined. And so, as the Mediterranean settles into a long golden evening of stability, the echoes of the final war of the Republic fade away, replaced by the soft, rhythmic breathing of an empire that is finally at rest. The floor of the Roman Senate is a sea of white wool and deep purple borders, a quiet gathering of men who have seen the world burn and now watch as the embers are carefully gathered into a single hand. In the month of January, in the year 27 before the Common Era, the man who has held the fate of the Mediterranean in his grasp for over a decade stands before this assembly. There is no sound but the soft rustle of togas and the distant, muffled echoes of the city outside. He does not come with the thunder of a conqueror or the arrogance of a king, but with a gesture that seems almost impossible in its humility. He speaks softly, his voice carrying the weight of a long journey, as he announces that he is laying down his powers. He returns the provinces, the armies, and the laws back to the Senate and the people of Rome. It is a moment of profound stillness, a performance of such delicate grace that it leaves the room breathless. To the casual observer, this is the restoration of the Republic, the return of a lost age where no single man stands above the rest. But beneath the surface of this symbolic surrender, a new foundation is being laid, stone by silent stone. The senators, well aware that the alternative to this man's leadership is the chaos of another civil war, respond with a chorus of refusal. They beg him to stay, to guide them, to remain the protector of the state. It is a dance of power, choreographed with the utmost care, a theatrical display where the appearance of freedom is preserved, even as the reality of control is solidified. In this moment, the boy who was Octavian ceases to be a mere general or a faction leader. He becomes something different, something ancient and new all at once. The Senate grants him a title that has never been held by a mortal man before, Augustus. The name itself carries a soft, resonant quality, drifting through the air like the scent of incense in a cool temple. It is not a title of military command, like dictator or king, but a word steeped in religious and sacral significance. To be Augustus is to be increased or venerated, a term that suggests a person who is divinely favored, someone whose very presence brings growth and prosperity to the land. It evokes the image of a sacred grove or a consecrated space where the gods might choose to dwell. By accepting this name, he moves beyond the reach of ordinary politics. He becomes a figure of reverence, a living bridge between the mundane world of taxes and grain and the eternal world of the divine. The city of Rome, once a place of clashing steel and shouting mobs, begins to feel like a sanctuary under his quiet watch. And so, the Principate is born, a system of government that moves with the silence of a deep river. Augustus does not call himself an emperor in the way we might imagine today. He prefers the title princeps, or first citizen. It is a term of polite deference, suggesting that he is merely the first among equals, a man who leads not through force but through authority and influence. This is the hidden monarchy, a masterpiece of political camouflage, where the old institutions of the Republic, the consuls, the praetors, the tribunes, continue to function as they always have, yet every thread of power leads back to a single steady hand. He sits in the Senate not on a throne, but on a bench among his peers, listening with a patient expression, even as his word becomes the law that binds the edges of the known world. As the years pass, this new order requires a different kind of protection, one that is discreet and ever-present. Within the heart of the city, Augustus establishes the Praetorian Guard, an elite body of soldiers tasked with the safety of the princeps and the stability of Rome itself. Unlike the massive legions that guard the distant frontiers, the Praetorians are a quiet presence, their shadow lengthening across the marble corridors of the Palatine Hill. They represent the reality of the new age, the understanding that peace, however beautiful, requires a watchful eye and a ready sword. They are the silent sentinels of the domestic sphere, ensuring that the turbulence of the past remains buried beneath the steady rhythm of the present. The atmosphere of Rome begins to change under this new arrangement, softening into a period of architectural and spiritual renewal. Augustus understands that for the people to believe in this peace, they must see it reflected in the very stones of the city. He begins a massive project of restoration, breathing life back into 82 ancient temples that had fallen into decay during the years of neglect. The smell of fresh cedar and the cool touch of new marble become the sensory hallmarks of his reign. He famously remarks that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, but the transformation is deeper than the surface of the buildings. It is a restoration of the Roman soul, a return to the virtues of the ancestors, or at least the comforting idea of them. In the quiet of his home on the Palatine, which is notably modest compared to the sprawling villas of the wealthy elite, Augustus lives a life of calculated simplicity. He eats plain bread and small fish, wears clothes woven by the women of his own family, and avoids the ostentatious displays of wealth that had fueled the resentments of the previous generation. This personal restraint is part of the architecture of his power. By appearing to want nothing for himself, he makes it easier for the world to give him everything. He is the father of the country, the pater patriae, a figure who watches over the sprawling empire with the same focused attention a gardener might give to a prized orchard. The first settlement of 27, before the Common Era, is not just a political agreement, but a psychological shift for the millions of souls living from the Pillars of Hercules to the banks of the Euphrates. The anxiety of the unknown, which had gripped the Mediterranean for a century, begins to dissolve into a sense of permanence. People begin to plan for the future, to plant olive trees that will take decades to fruit, and to build homes that they expect their grandchildren to inherit. The world feels larger and yet more connected, as the roads that once carried armies now carry merchants, poets, and travellers. As the sun sets over the 7 hills, the light catches the gold on the newly restored temples, casting long, peaceful shadows across the forum. The chaos of the civil wars feels like a distant, fading dream, a story told by elders to children who have never known the sound of a city under siege. There is a profound sense of relief in this new silence. The Republic has not truly returned, but in its place, Something more stable has arrived, a structure that provides the shade in which a new civilization can grow. Augustus remains at the center of it all, a quiet, tireless figure working by the light of a single lamp, weaving the disparate threads of an empire into a single, enduring tapestry of peace. The transition is so seamless, so gentle, that the transition from a world of many voices to a world of one seems almost natural, like the changing of the seasons. The Senate continues to meet, the elections are still held, and the ancient rituals are performed with more fervor than ever before. But the heartbeat of Rome now pulses in time with the heartbeat of the princeps. He has created a world where the appearance of the old remains, while the reality of the new provides the strength to endure. It is a delicate balance, a bridge built of both iron and silk, stretching across the abyss of history toward a horizon that is finally, blessedly clear. In this atmosphere of newfound calm, the mind is free to wander through the quiet streets of the capital, past the silent statues of heroes long dead, and the vibrant markets of a city that has forgotten how to fear. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of the sea and the earthy aroma of the Tiber, as the empire settles into its first true night of deep, undisturbed sleep. The architect has finished the foundation, and the structure he has built will stand long after the marble has weathered and the names of the senators have been forgotten. For now there is only the peace, the vast encompassing peace of Augustus. The silence of a world no longer at war is a heavy, rhythmic thing, like the steady breathing of a giant at rest. For decades, the Mediterranean had been a theatre of chaos, its waters churned by the oars of rival fleets and its soil soaked by the blood of brothers. But under the steady hand of Augustus, the frantic pulse of the world begins to slow. This is the dawn of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a concept that is less a sudden event and more a gradual cooling shadow spreading across the map. It is a peace not merely defined by the absence of battle, but by the presence of a profound, quiet stability that allows a merchant in Alexandria to sleep soundly, knowing his grain ships will reach Ostia without the threat of pirates or civil strife. The Mediterranean, once a jagged collection of warring territories, becomes a Roman lake, a vast blue highway where ideas, silk and spices flow as freely as the water itself. As the years pass, this tranquility becomes the very air the empire breathes. The frontiers are pushed to the natural boundaries of the Rhine and the Danube, and within those borders, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer is more likely to be shaping a ploughshare than a gladius. Augustus understands that a lasting peace must be felt in the mundane details of daily life, in the safety of the mountain passes, and the reliability of the paved roads that now stretch like silver ribbons across the provinces. There is a certain weightlessness to this era, a sense that the heavy burden of survival has been lifted, replaced by the slow, deliberate work of building a civilization that might actually endure. But Augustus knows that a city built of marble is hollow if the hearts of its people are fractured. He looks upon the Roman people and sees a society that has lost its way during the long nights of the civil wars. The old ways, the gravitas, the piety, and the strict devotion to the family have been eroded by the decadence of a changing world. And so, with the same meticulous care he used to reorganize the legions, he turns his gaze toward the Roman home. He introduces sweeping moral legislations known as the Julian laws, designed to weave the frayed threads of the social fabric back together. He encourages marriage and the raising of children, seeing the family as the smallest, most vital unit of the state's strength. It is a gentle but firm nudging of a nation toward a more disciplined, traditional life, a return to the virtues of the ancestors who first tilled the Italian soil. In the quiet courtyards of the Roman villas, the atmosphere begins to shift. There is a renewed emphasis on the sanctity of the hearth. Augustus himself leads by example, or at least the image of an example. living a life of relative simplicity compared to the Eastern excesses of Marc Antony. He wears clothes woven by the women of his own household, signaling to every citizen that the true strength of Rome lies not in golden crowns, but in the humble wool and the steady work of the loom. He believes that if the Roman family is stable, the Roman state will be unbreakable. It is a vision of a society where every person has a place and every action is governed by a sense of duty to one's lineage and one's gods. The gods, too, have been waiting in the shadows of neglected shrines. For a long time, the smoke of sacrifice had grown thin, and the ancient rituals had been performed with a hurried, distracted air. Augustus seeks to wake the sleeping spirits of the Roman religion. He begins a massive project of restoration, repairing 82 temples in a single year, ensuring that the divine protectors of the city are housed in splendor. But it is more than just masonry and gold leaf. It is about the revival of the sacred rhythm of the year. He restores ancient priesthoods that had fallen into obscurity and breathes new life into festivals that had been forgotten by the younger generation. Imagine the sound of the Lupercalia or the secular games, the rhythmic chanting of priests, the smell of frankincense drifting through the colonnades, and the sight of white-robed processions moving slowly through the streets. These rituals act as a heartbeat for the city, a reminder that the Romans are part of a lineage that stretches back to the founding of the world. By positioning himself as the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of the Roman religion, Augustus becomes the bridge between the earthly and the divine. He is the guardian of the sacred fire, the one who ensures that the relationship between Rome and the heavens remains harmonious. In this restored world, the gods are no longer distant or angry. They are the silent partners in the empire's success, watching over the fields and the forums with a steady, golden gaze. As these reforms take hold, the identity of the emperor begins to merge with the identity of the land itself. In the year 2 before the Common Era, the Senate bestows upon him a title that carries more weight than any military rank or political office. Pater Patriae, the father of the country. It is a title that speaks of protection, of guidance, and of a deep paternal affection. No longer is he just the victor of Actium or the nephew of Caesar. He is the patriarch of a global family. This concept of the emperor as a father figure settles over the Mediterranean like a warm blanket. It suggests that the people are safe, that someone is watching over them with the stern but loving care of a parent. The provinces feel this change as much as the capital. In the distant hills of Gaul and the sun-drenched plains of Hispania, the name of Augustus is spoken with a mixture of reverence and relief. The local elites begin to model their own lives after the Roman ideal, building theatres and baths and temples to the imperial cult. The peace is not forced upon them by the edge of a sword, but invited in by the promise of a better, more orderly life. The Roman peace is a slow-moving tide, washing away the jagged edges of tribal conflict and replacing them with the smooth, predictable cycles of trade and law. And so, the world enters a long, meditative afternoon. The frantic energy of the Republic, with its shouting orators and its bloody street fights, is a memory that grows dimmer with every passing season. In its place is a measured, quiet efficiency. The census is taken, the taxes are collected fairly, and the grain supply is secured. The machinery of the empire hums with a soft, low vibration, a sound that is easily mistaken for silence. Augustus sits at the center of this vast web, a man who has traded the armor of a general for the simple toga of a citizen, yet whose influence is felt in every corner of the known world. The nights in Rome are different now. The city is lit by the soft glow of oil lamps, reflecting off the newly polished marble of the temples. The streets are safer, the watchmen move with a steady pace, and the sounds of the night are those of a city that is finally at peace with itself. There is a sense of completion, a feeling that the long journey from the ruins of the Civil War has finally reached a place of rest. The architect has not only built the walls, he has cultivated the garden within them. As the stars turn slowly over the Palatine Hill, one can almost feel the weight of history settling into a comfortable groove. The reforms of Augustus have created a world where the future feels certain, where the sun will rise tomorrow over an empire that is unified, pious, and calm. The father of the country has tucked his children into bed, and for the first time in a century, the Roman world sleeps without fear, cradled in the enduring, quiet strength of the Pax Romana. The air is still, the fires in the temples burn with a steady flame, and the empire waits, in perfect, unmoving tranquility, for the coming of a new and golden age. The sound of a chisel striking stone is a steady, rhythmic pulse that echoes through the narrow streets of the city, a heartbeat of creation that never seems to tire. It is the sound of a legacy being etched into the very earth, a transformation so profound that the people of Rome begin to feel they are living within a dream of white stone and gleaming light. Augustus understood that to change the spirit of a people, one must first change the world they see when they open their eyes each morning. He did not merely want to rule a city, he wanted to craft a monument to the endurance of the Roman soul, a physical manifestation of the order and beauty he had brought to the chaotic tides of history. As the years pass, the dusty, crowded landscape of sun-dried brick begins to dissolve, replaced by the cool, smooth touch of lunar marble. The city stretches and sighs, shedding its old, weathered skin for something far more luminous. At the heart of this rebirth stands the Forum of Augustus, a grand expanse of public space that feels as though it was carved from a single, massive block of moonlight. Here, the temple of Mars Ultor rises toward the heavens, its towering columns standing like silent sentinels over the affairs of men. Within its shadows, the history of Rome is laid out in statues of bronze and stone, a lineage of heroes that leads directly to the man who now holds the world in his hands. To walk through this forum is to walk through a forest of memory, where the air is cool and the noise of the bustling markets fades into a respectful hum. The transformation is not merely one of aesthetics, but of a deep and abiding care for the daily lives of the millions who call Rome their home. Augustus looks upon the city and sees more than just monuments. He sees the thirst of the people, the danger of the night, and the constant threat of the flames that often lick at the wooden eaves of the tenements. And so, he turns his mind to the invisible threads that hold a civilization together. Deep beneath the streets and high above the valleys, the great aqueducts are repaired and expanded, bringing the sweet, cold waters of the distant mountains into the very heart of the heat-soaked city. The sound of running water becomes the new music of Rome, a constant bubbling reminder of the emperor's providence. He organizes the vigiles, the first true fire brigade and night watch, 7,000 men who roam the darkened streets while the city sleeps, their lanterns flickering like grounded stars, ensuring that the peace of the day is not broken by the terrors of the night. In the northern reaches of the city, in the wide, grassy expanse known as the Campus Martius, there rises a structure of such delicate beauty that it seems almost to breathe. This is the Ara Pacis, the altar of Augustan peace, a masterpiece of white marble that captures the essence of the new age in exquisite detail. The carvings upon its walls are soft and fluid, depicting processions of priests, senators, and the imperial family itself, all moving with a quiet dignity toward a shared future. There are scenes of Earth herself, a motherly figure surrounded by the fruits of the field and the gentle beasts of the wild, symbolizing a world that is finally at rest. To stand before the Ara Pacis is to feel the weight of the civil wars finally lifting, replaced by a sense of abundance and quietude. It is a place where the wind whispers through the nearby trees and the scent of incense lingers in the air, a sanctuary for a weary empire to find its breath again. The emperor often walks through these new spaces, perhaps in the quiet hours of the early morning, when the light is still soft and the shadows are long. He is a man who has lived through the storm and now finds himself the architect of the calm. There is a famous boast attributed to him, one that he carries with a humble yet profound pride, that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. It is not just a statement of architectural achievement, but a promise kept to the ancestors and to the children yet unborn. The brick was the past, fragile and prone to decay. The marble is the present, enduring, radiant, and strong. It reflects the sun in a way that the old city never could, casting a glow that seems to emanate from the stone itself, as if the very foundations of the empire have become divine. Beyond the grand temples and the soaring arches, the infrastructure of the empire begins to flow like blood through a healthy body. The roads, paved with heavy stones and engineered to last for centuries, stretch out from the golden milestone in the forum like the rays of a sun that never sets. These roads carry the grain that feeds the hungry, the messages that bind the provinces, and the travellers who move with a newfound safety from the misty forests of the north to the sun-drenched sands of the south. The world has become smaller, more intimate, and more manageable. The chaos of the old world has been paved over, smoothed out by the steady hand of a master builder who understands that an empire is only as strong as the stones beneath its feet. As the sun begins to move toward the horizon, painting the marble facades in shades of honey and rose, the city of Rome settles into a comfortable, rhythmic stillness. The fountains continue their tireless dance, the water splashing softly into basins of polished stone. The great theatres and baths, gifts from the emperor and his loyal friend Agrippa, stand ready to welcome the citizens into spaces of leisure and reflection. There is a sense of wholeness here, a feeling that every stone has been placed with a specific purpose, contributing to a grand design that is both human and eternal. The marble does not feel cold. It feels solid, a grounding presence in a world that was once defined by its volatility. One can imagine the citizens of Rome leaning against these cool walls as the twilight deepens, looking up at the pediments of the temples where the gods seem to watch over them with a renewed favour. The smoke from the evening fires rises in thin, straight lines into a sky of deepening purple. There is no longer the sound of marching boots or the frantic shouting of political rivals in the streets. Instead, there is the murmur of families eating together, the distant song of a street performer, and the soft rustle of the wind through the newly planted gardens of the Palatine Hill. Augustus has built more than just buildings. He has built a sanctuary. He has crafted a physical environment that encourages the soul to rest, to trust in the stability of the state, and to believe in the permanence of the peace. The city has become a reflection of the man himself, measured, orderly, and seemingly timeless. Every archway, every colonnade, and every paved square serves as a testament to the idea that greatness is not found in the heat of battle, but in the slow, deliberate work of construction. The marble reflects the moonlight now, a pale, ghostly beauty that guides the way for the late-night traveller. The shadows are no longer places of dread, but spaces of cool relief. And as the city of marble sleeps, it does so with the heavy, dreamless slumber of a world that knows its foundations are deep, its walls are high, and its future is as solid as the stone from which it was carved. The transition from the old world to the new is complete, and the golden age is no longer a promise. It is the very ground upon which the Romans walk. The weight of a crown is often measured not by the gold it contains, but by the distance of the borders it must defend. For Augustus, the peace of the city is a fragile thing, a soft flame that must be shielded from the cold winds blowing from the edges of the known world. He understands that for the Roman heart to beat steadily, the limbs of the empire must be strong, disciplined, and ever watchful. It is not enough to simply exist. Rome must be a fortress of order in a landscape of uncertainty. As the years pass, the emperor turns his gaze away from the marble forums and toward the rugged horizons of the north and east. He envisions an empire defined by natural boundaries, rivers that flow like silver ribbons, mountains that stand as silent sentinels, and forests that whisper of ancient mysteries. To achieve this, he must transform the very soul of the Roman military. No longer would the legions be the private tools of ambitious generals, bound by temporary oaths and the promise of plunder. Instead, Augustus creates a professional force, a standing army where a soldier's loyalty is pledged to the state itself. He establishes the military treasury, the aerarium militer, ensuring that when a veteran finally hangs up his sword, he is granted a pension or a plot of land, a small piece of the peace he spent his life defending. This system provides a quiet dignity to the retired soldier, allowing him to settle in the provinces and sow the seeds of Roman culture in distant soils. In the east, where the sun rises over the vast plains of the Parthian Empire, a long-standing shadow hung over the Roman psyche. Decades earlier, the standards of the legions, the sacred golden eagles, had been lost in the dust of defeat, a stain on the honor of the Republic. But Augustus, ever the diplomat, chooses the path of patience over the path of blood. Through careful negotiation and the steady pressure of his presence, he secures the return of the lost standards without striking a single blow. It is a triumph of the mind, a victory of words that restores the pride of the people. The standards are brought back to Rome and housed in the temple of Mars Ultor, where they reflect the soft glow of flickering oil lamps, symbols of a dignity reclaimed and a world brought into balance. Yet the north remains a place of deep shadows and untamed spirits. The expansion into Germania is a dream of a shorter, more defensible border along the Elbe River, a vision of stretching the Roman mantle over the dense, mist-shrouded forests. For a time it seems the dream is within reach. Roman roads begin to cut through the ancient woods, and the sound of the axe echoes where once there was only the wind. But the forest is a living thing, and it does not yield easily to the surveyor's chain. In the 9th year of the Common Era, the tragedy of the Teutoburg forest strikes like a sudden winter storm. 3 entire legions are lost in the tangled depths, vanished into the green gloom under the betrayal of the chieftain Arminius. In the quiet halls of the Palatine, it is said that Augustus would sometimes wander at night, his footsteps echoing on the cold stone, crying out for the lost commander to give him back his legions. It is a moment of profound vulnerability for the man who rebuilt the world. The tragedy marks a turning point, a realization that even the power of Rome has its limits. He accepts the Rhine as the boundary, a natural silver line where the civilization of the vine and the olive meets the wild, untamed spirit of the north. This acceptance is not a failure, but a refinement, a recognition that a gardener must know where his garden ends and the wilderness begins. Despite this loss, the provinces under his care begin to knit together into a cohesive, breathing network. The Mediterranean, once a sea of pirates and warring fleets, becomes a Roman lake, a vast blue highway where merchant ships glide silently under the summer sun. Grain from the fertile fields of Egypt, silk from the distant east, and silver from the mines of Hispania flow toward the center, while the laws and language of Rome flow outward. Each province is no longer a conquered territory to be drained, but a vital organ in a grand body, connected by the steady pulse of trade and the reliable rhythm of the Roman post. Augustus encourages the growth of cities in the wilder lands, places where the forum and the bathhouse become the new anchors of social life. A traveller could walk from the sun-drenched coast of Africa to the rainy hills of Gaul and find the same familiar architecture, the same sense of civic order. The integration is slow, like the growth of an oak tree, but it is deep-rooted. The provincial governors are now overseen with a watchful eye, their salaries paid by the central treasury to discourage the old habits of corruption. There is a sense of fairness that settles over the land, a quiet assurance that justice is not a luxury of the rich, but a foundation of the state. As the borders are secured and the economy flourishes, the very air of the empire seems to change. It is an era of interconnectedness, where a potter in a small village can dream of his wares reaching the tables of the capital. The roads, paved with heavy basalt and engineered to last for centuries, carry more than just soldiers. They carry ideas, stories, and the quiet footsteps of people finally free to move without fear. The horizon is no longer a place of threat, but a place of possibility. The emperor sits in his modest study, perhaps listening to the distant sound of a fountain or the rustle of a scroll. He has built a world where the frontiers are not just walls of stone and wood, but boundaries of the mind, a clear definition of what it means to be part of the Roman peace. The tragedy in the forest remains a scar, but even scars fade over time, becoming part of the story of a life well lived. He has secured the house, and now, as the evening of his reign approaches, he can look upon his work and see that it is solid. The empire is a tapestry, woven from 1,000 different threads, yet held together by a single steady hand. And as the stars begin to peer through the velvet sky over the vast reaches of his domain, the world rests, secure in the knowledge that the frontiers are held, the treasury is full, and the peace is no longer a fragile hope, but a lasting reality. The weight of a crown is not found in the gold of its circlet, but in the quiet, persistent worry of what happens when the head that wears it finally rests. For all the marble he had raised, and all the borders he had secured, Augustus knew that the greatest threat to his peace was not a foreign king or a rebellious legion, but the simple, inevitable passage of time. He had spent decades building a system that functioned like a finely tuned clock, yet he lacked the one thing that ensures a machine continues to run, a clear, undisputed heir. Fate, it seemed, was less cooperative than the Roman Senate. One by one, those he had groomed for the task, his nephew Marcellus, his loyal friend Agrippa, and his beloved grandsons Gaius and Lucius, had been claimed by illness or misfortune, slipping away like shadows into the night. It was a heavy burden for an aging man to bear, watching the future he had so carefully constructed dissolve before his eyes. And so, the mantle eventually fell to Tiberius, the son of his wife Livia. Tiberius was a man of stern discipline and proven military skill, yet he possessed a brooding, solitary nature that stood in stark contrast to the charismatic warmth Augustus had mastered. The transition was not born of a sudden burst of passion, but of a slow, pragmatic realization that the empire required a steady hand, even if that hand was cold. Augustus adopted him, bringing him into the inner circle of power, ensuring that when the moment came, the machinery of state would not grind to a halt. There is a certain melancholy in this final act of preparation, a weary architect checking the foundations one last time, handing the keys to a successor who understands the duty, if not the joy, of the work. As the year 14 of the Common Era arrived, the emperor's health began to fade with the gentle persistence of a summer twilight. He was 75 years old, a remarkable age for a man who had been sickly in his youth and had survived decades of civil war and political intrigue. He decided to travel south, away from the humid bustle of Rome, seeking the soft sea breezes of the Campanian coast. It was a journey of quiet reflection, a slow procession through a landscape he had helped transform. He spent his final days in Nola, in the very house where his father had passed away decades before, as if the circle of his life were naturally closing, drawing him back to his origins. In those quiet rooms, surrounded by the scent of the sea and the hushed whispers of his closest companions, Augustus remained composed. History tells us that on his final day he asked for a mirror to arrange his hair and for his friends to come to his bedside. He did not speak of conquests or tax codes or the building of temples. Instead, he looked at those who had shared his long journey and asked if he had played his part well in the comedy of life. It was a modest question for a man who had been hailed as a god, a brief glimpse into the mind of the performer who had spent 40 years maintaining the mask of the first citizen to keep the peace. When they assured him that he had, he dismissed them, and in the arms of his wife Livia, he slipped away as quietly as a candle flickering out in a still room. The transition that followed was the ultimate testament to his genius. There were no riots in the streets, no clashing of swords in the forum, no desperate scramble for power. The Senate met, the legions remained at their posts, and Tiberius assumed the role that had been prepared for him. The peace that Augustus had forged was so deeply embedded in the soil of the empire that it survived the death of its creator. This was the true miracle of his reign, not that he had seized power, but that he had made that power invisible, turning a chaotic republic into a stable, enduring institution that could function even when the great man was gone. For the next 2 centuries, the world would know a stability that had previously been unimaginable. This period, often called the Pax Romana, allowed the seeds Augustus had planted to grow into a vast, interconnected civilization. Merchants could travel from the sun-drenched hills of Spain to the dusty markets of Syria without crossing a single hostile border. A traveller could walk on paved Roman roads that stretched for thousands of miles, protected by the same laws and using the same currency. In the quiet villages of Gaul and the bustling ports of North Africa, children grew to adulthood without ever knowing the sound of a war horn or the sight of a burning field. This long equilibrium provided the space for art, philosophy, and trade to flourish, weaving a cultural fabric so strong that its patterns are still visible in the world we inhabit today. We might pause to reflect on the cost of such a peace, for it was bought with the loss of old liberties and the occasional harshness of imperial rule. But for the millions of people who lived beneath the shadow of the eagle, the trade-off was a welcome one. After generations of blood and fire, the silence of the frontiers was a beautiful thing. The architect had understood that most people do not crave the noise of political upheaval. They crave the safety to plant a garden, to raise a family, and to sleep soundly at night, knowing the roof above them is secure. As we look back across the vast expanse of 2,000 years, the figure of Augustus remains somewhat elusive, hidden behind the marble statues and the grand titles. He was a man of contradictions, a ruthless youth who became a merciful elder, a revolutionary who draped himself in tradition, a solitary soul who lived his life in the most public of arenas. Yet his legacy is not found in the stone of the Pantheon or the verses of the poets, but in the very idea of a world united by law and order. He took a crumbling ruin and rebuilt it into a home that would shelter Western civilization for centuries to come. The lamps in the halls of history burn low, but the light of the Augustan age continues to cast a long, steady glow. The empire he built eventually changed, shifted and faded, as all human things must. But the dream of a lasting peace remained a guiding star for all who followed. And so, we leave him there, in the quiet house at Nola, his work finished, his city transformed,